Eindelijk is het zover. En wij hebben hem hier in de studio om jou er alles over te vertellen. De Sony A7S III. Het heeft even geduurd, maar het is zover. Er werd zelfs getwijfeld of die überhaupt nog zou komen, maar gelukkig was dat laatste onterecht. Want vandaag kondigde Sony aan de A7S Mark III. Wij hebben hem in de studio. En gisteravond heb ik hem bezorgd gekregen en ben ik alvast even naar buiten gegaan om toch al even een paar uurtjes wat testbeelden voor je te maken. Dus die hebben we. Niet de meest spectaculaire testbeelden, maar er zijn dus testbeelden. Goed, om ons alles over de camera te vertellen, hebben wij verbinding met Pierrick van Sony Europa. Hij zit in Londen en hij weet echt alles wat er over deze camera te weten valt. Dus we gaan hem het hemd van het lijf vragen. Hello, Pierrick.
Hello, how are you? Hello everyone.
I'm very pleased to have you in the show. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me for this special moment.
A special moment it is, indeed. Pierrick, tell me, how excited are you for the announcement of today?
I'm super excited. We've been working in the background for so many months now, and I've been really excited myself, a user of Alpha, to reveal to everyone how awesome this camera is and all these new features that I'm sure are going to please many Alpha shooters and videographers across the world.
Well, I think you're right on that point. And let's start with a big question that a lot of users of the Alpha series will have is what took you guys so long?
That's the first question I get every time.
Yes.
I think that obviously the core of this camera is everything is new. I've just saw in the announcement video, we redesigned completely everything. The kind of like the core of this camera and what unleashed those performances, obviously, and then this amazing 4K 120p quality, etc., is obviously the brand new sensor that is now back illuminating, allowing us to have a faster readout speeds. But more importantly, the new processor is kind of key in this camera, and that's why it took so long. We needed to get those two things right to make sure we've got to nail down what makes the trademark of the S-Line series, the low light capabilities, the amazing image quality, even in very dark places, and then to completely unleash this kind of amazing video capabilities. I think most of our customers were expecting probably something like 4K 60p with a similar low light kind of capabilities, and we thought that we will needed to take the time to nail everything down and to make those features very reliable and obviously appropriate for a lot of enthusiast usage, but also professional usage.
Yeah, well, let's talk about specification because you gave already a lot. The A7S Mark II was a very popular camera, a camera used by independent filmmakers, by Hollywood movie sets, as a crash cam, for example. Really impressive camera. We at Camera Express video team use the A7S Mark II till this very day, so that says also a lot. We like it very much. People will be very eager to know, what does this new Mark III bring?
I think that as you said, we were taken by storm by the popularity of the Alpha 7S Mark II. Obviously, that was one of the first full-frame camera offering 4K, which was groundbreaking at the time. And what we wanted to design with this camera is to provide something that is professionally reliable. So, for example, if you're looking at the recording mode in 4K 120p, 60p, 30p, when you're looking at the full HD 120p and etc., we design new codecs to satisfy those professional demands, like a new H.265 codec, which is our XAVC HS. Now we included all intra recording because some video makers prefer to have larger file size, but the most extreme quality. So we needed to manage that in that camera, and on top, developing the body around the workflow of the new freelancers of 2020 that needs that flexibility to go around, to go to client, to be able to be very swiftly reacting to the moment, take interviews and then do some B-rolls for the video that they're creating for them. So we really needed to nail down all those points and to make them reliable. Not just to announce we are doing 4K and not be able to you know, like to deliver on the image quality, but also on the requirements we've been passed on by our customers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yesterday I went out to test the camera a little bit. Am I earlier than you with holding the camera in my hand, or?
Yes.
Seriously?
That was breaks my heart. Is obviously we have like a very limited production before announcement, and we prefer to, you know, like give it into the hands of the people that obviously use the camera on a daily basis, rather than like keeping it in an office with me, which makes me sad, obviously, a little bit. But it's also it's comforting to know that everyone that has tested it, you included, find it amazing, and that also comforts our idea that this camera will be quite groundbreaking for the video making.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, autofocus, I tested it a little bit yesterday. It was very snappy, very quick, very precise. I have some footage of that also. Let's talk about something that maybe some people question. It's the sensor. It's a 12 megapixel sensor. And that's a really specific choice of you guys, right? To put it in this camera. Can you explain what does the benefits of the 12 megapixel sensor are for this camera?
So yes, absolutely. I think the sensor is part of a system to deliver some features. You can't just like judge the sensor and etc. So the kind of like the background of it is like 12 megapixel is actually perfect for 4K. And as you know, in Sony cameras, we don't do so-called pixel binning or line skipping, which means like when we capture some pixels, we retain the data and we deliver it. So you can get like the best sharpness and color reproduction in your 4K footage. But in order also to deliver those amazing features for long recording times and etc., we needed to build like an ecosystem around it. So I mentioned the processor, the new Bionz XR. You might find it surprising, but that processor is 8 times faster than what is in the Alpha 9 Mark II.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like an amazing piece of technology. That's also why it took us so long to develop this. And then on top of that, we built a new heat dissipation system to manage like those long recording times as well, and not to have that issue of the camera, you know, like being like limited.
Yeah.
We're trying to kind of like try to provide as much as possible to the customers, so that someone that shoots like, I don't know, like a social event and needs to record for 45 minutes, 1 hour, and someone that shoots more like, I would say, content and etc., and only do like 2 or 3 minutes, but have very high frame rates and etc., they both can use this camera. And if someone is doing both, this camera is also perfect for them. So that's why the 12 megapixel is so important. It's back illuminated, so we gain on readout speed, and that's why we can now do 4K 120p, 4K 60p internal.
And keep that low light quality, right? Which the A7S Mark II was really famous for.
Absolutely. Like as our president Kenji Tanaka-san mentioned, like the S series used to be sensibility. Obviously, with this camera, everything is new, so we can't just like say this is an amazing low light camera. But it was also the core of development. The first thing they thought about is Alpha 7S Mark II is amazing in low light, and we need at least to deliver that performance or even better, which is the case on the Alpha 7S Mark III. So as you said, 12 megapixel really help with that, because you've got bigger pixel and your signal to noise is obviously much better than in a 40 megapixel, 60 megapixel camera.
Well, and add to that 15 stops of dynamic range in the new S-Log 3. We're going to talk about that later, because that blew my mind. And as a filmmaker myself, that's something that I get really excited about. 15 stops is a lot for a camera of this size. But something else that I was really excited about was this little thing. It flips around, which is amazing, right?
The first Alpha cameras that does that. Yes. Obviously, for years, I'm not going to ignore that. For years, we had customers like asking, like, do the flip out screen, do the flip out screen, do the flip out screen in the Alpha cameras. And obviously, we listen. Our goal is not to just like, no, we are doing our own thing. Our goal is obviously to take into consideration what the customers want. What technology we want to put in the market, and how we kind of like stimulate this photography and videography markets. And obviously, with all these demands, we needed to design these kind of things, because we realized, obviously, if many videographers use this camera, they will need the, you know, like to turn it out, shoot from a low angle, shoot from a high angle, to have that flexibility. And it was like almost a requirement for us
Yeah.
to integrate in this camera that is very much video centric.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about the 4K. 120,
Yes.
great. We filmmakers love that. Those super slow
Yeah.
motion footage that you can make.
Glad you like it.
It has a slide crop of 10%. Do I say that right?
Yes.
Can we still call that 4K then?
Yes, so that's a very good point. Thank you for asking me that. Actually, the sensor is not just 12 megapixel, it's slightly above 12 megapixel, it's 12.1 if I'm exact, in terms of effective pixel
Yes.
recorded, which means it gives us like that slight kind of like buffer to still have like that 1.1 crop in 4K 120p and still deliver 4K full pixel readout. So for people that were wondering like, oh, they have a crop, so does it mean I don't get 4K? You get 4K full pixel readout, so we're not compromising on quality. And again, I'm coming back to the argument, that's why it took us so long, because we needed to figure out, we don't want to deliver 4K 120p at a below resolution than 4K, we need to deliver 4K.
Yeah.
So, you know, all these things takes time to make
Yeah.
right. And yeah, even though you have a crop, we still deliver 4K.
Great. Well, I tried to show a lot of test footage yesterday, so hopefully people can now
Yeah.
see the quality that comes out of this camera. The A7S Mark II was, of course, a feature-packed camera with a lot of features, especially for filmmakers, video makers. All of those are still in this body, but there are some new things that I want to address, and two of them in particular, starting with the rolling shutter, because yesterday I did some testing. I had this A7S Mark II with me and this new A7S Mark III, and I did the rolling shutter test, and it blew my mind because the 3, there's none, almost none left, right?
Yes, so that's one of the big points. As I said, like it takes time to develop a processor and a sensor, and one of the benefits, as you rightly mentioned, is rolling shutter. That's a big concern of videographers. That's something they fed back on Alpha 7S Mark II, and on this camera is actually 3 times better than the Alpha 7S Mark II. But that's also one of the benefits of processing data super fast, is mean like your sensor scan much more quickly. So when you're doing panning shots, especially in slow motion, you might want to have like, I don't know, a biker like in the forest, and then you're just like doing a panic in slow motion, like to do some dramatic shots. In those situations, obviously, rolling shutter is very important. And we absolutely, I think, improved it by quite a lot. And as you just mentioned, obviously it's not a global shutter performance because this is not a global shutter. But we are kind of like nearing that. And that was very important for us to develop for videographers because that was one of the main points. They were like, please improve that. We really needed this to be improved for our workflow. So
yeah, well,
we delivered.
I hope I can show the test footage from yesterday night because I really could see it right there at that moment in this little screen even. So something else, the in-body image stabilization, 5.5 stops. Do I say that right?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. So it goes up to 5.5 stops, and we've got actually a new active mode.
Yes, I wanted to address that. Yes.
Yeah. So the new active mode is actually kind of like a new technology we recently included in our latest camera, especially the ZV-1. You know, the one that is more like I would say vlogger on the go oriented.
Yes.
And what active mode means is like it's a Sony technology for digital stabilization, but it's actually a little bit more intelligent than just scanning and just like doing like some crop and adjustments on the sensor. Actually, it's like capturing the gyroscopic data from the camera. And what it allows you to do is actually to be much more precise and to have less kind of like, I would say, wobbly backgrounds when this is applied. So it looks very natural. And the decision to make that in a full frame camera that is obviously more targeted towards like young student filmmakers, content creators, documentalists, and etc. is obviously sometimes you're on a job with your clients, right? You were supposed to do just one scene on tripod, and suddenly your client is like, oh no, I would like this kind of shot, or I want to like a B-roll of this, and etc. And you don't have your gimbal on you. And this is a very good way to kind of like follow your subjects and kind of like get still really smooth footage. Obviously, it's not, you know, it won't be exactly on par as a gimbal, but it's very close.
I tested it out. I tested it out yesterday also. Just walking without it and with it activated. A big topic that I want to discuss with you is a feature-packed camera like this in a small body, high resolutions, high bit rates, high frame rates. You're already gonna know what I'm gonna ask. Recording limit, and how does it cope with heat?
So it copes very, very well. That was also one consideration when designing this camera. Obviously, as you just mentioned, like you can't just increase the feature, the bit rate, 422, 120p, all intra.
Yeah.
Like obviously, when you have a body like that, it's already quite tough, like for bigger professional camcorders like an FX9, these kind of things. Then when you switch like to an alpha body, obviously you have some heat building up. That's just a natural and a physic kind of like consequence that you can't really avoid. That's why they designed a new heat dissipation system behind the sensor.
Okay.
It's much more like it's much more efficient. It's actually 5 times efficient than what we have in the current alpha cameras. So that was built with that purpose, and that allows us like to kind of like record like at half frame rates for longer time. So for example, in 4K 120p, you can record internally up to 30 minutes, and usually like the limit is your card size, because 4K 120p 422 10-bit, you can imagine that is quite a lot of data like to write on a card. But 4K, for example, 4K 60p, if I'm shooting on all intra, so the most demanding codec, you know, like with the most data and the higher bit rate, actually we can shoot internally 60 minutes. But that's our own measurements.
Yes.
And we believe that people will experience actually longer recording times. It really depends on the environment. We can't say one number for any camera in the world. Like it will depend on environment, condition on the camera you're shooting, if you're, you know, like inside, outside, the temperature, anything. So, but we can at least ensure that 60 minutes in 4K 60p all intra 422 10-bit, no problem.
And you can now charge the camera with USB-C, so maybe that also helps a little bit?
Yeah, so I'm glad you're asking that, because actually it does help. We thought about people doing long interviews, but also people shooting kind of like, I would say, live events. And we thought that obviously an hour is a little bit limited. And I'm quite happy today to be able to say that in 4K 60p, again, all intra 422 10-bit, so not the lower bit rates and etc., you can shoot up to 4 hours on USB charging.
Wow.
So that's more than enough for anyone.
More than enough, The body. Let's talk a little bit about it. I have it here. We have already the flip out screen. We already saw that one. It's a little bit bigger than the A7S Mark II. It was my feeling. Feels a little bit more sturdy, more bulky. Maybe it's also because of that in-body image stabilization that makes the body a little bit bigger. But also the buttons are more. Yeah, you have more feel with the buttons. They're a little bit bigger, more. Yeah, I don't know how to call that, but it feels better to press them, eh?
Yes, absolutely. So that's like that. You're right to point that out. Actually, like it looks much more like an Alpha 7R Mark IV than an Alpha 7S Mark II in terms of body design, because obviously we are continually like considering what the customers are giving us as feedback. Some people were saying like, oh, the grip is too small. Some were saying like this button is like not really well placed, or it feels like I can't really touch it with gloves on, for example, this kind of thing. So we are always taking this kind of consideration, and that's why you see so many differences between the Alpha 7S Mark II and this one. Something I would like to point out is obviously it's very video oriented, even though it's like really appropriate for an hybrid shooter. Obviously, if you're a videographer, you'll feel right at home with having like a record button on the top, which was solely missing from Alpha cameras. And in terms of like the body design, maybe you've seen that the memory card actually chamber is new.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's like it feels more sturdy when you open it, and you have like a double security and etc. And it was all again designed for professional workflows. So it's just like to make people feel confident. They think like, oh, this camera is a powerhouse. I don't have to worry about my gear. I'm going to focus on the creative side of what I'm doing. And that's why we wanted to have. And also the card slots. I don't know if you saw, but we have a dual card slot.
Absolutely.
And I think the good thing is obviously people knows that now both card slots are both CF Express A and UHS-2 compatible. Yeah,
absolutely. We have the Z battery now. Big, bulky battery, gives a lot of energy. So that's a good thing also. Something I also want to mention, which I think a lot of Sony users are very happy to hear, is that the menus are improved. And because of the touchscreen, you can now touch and go through the menus and everything, which I made a bit of a video about so that people can see how that works and how intuitive that works. What does this bring for Sony users or new users maybe?
Again, like that's, we wanted to build on customers' feedback mainly was like, please make your menus touch capable. But obviously, we have received like all the feedbacks like, oh, your menus are not intuitive, or I'm a videographer, but when I still a very still photography oriented kind of like menu display, so it's very confusing for me and etc. So we got all those feedback and we decided, obviously, as this camera is addressed to video making, but also for hybrid shooters, so people that need to switch around from video to still photography to video quite quickly in their workflow. They really need to have kind of like a menu design that is quick and intuitive. So as you said, like you can really operate it like a smartphone. That's kind of like our main goal. We kind of like rearrange the menus to make them intuitive. When you're in video mode, you touch the menu, you only see the video features. When you switch back to stills, you see like the still features. So again, we listened and we try to kind of like make it like as flawless as possible. So when you're on the shoot, you don't think about the menu system, which was one of also the big feedback about the Alpha 7S Mark II.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very curious to hear Sony users and new Sony users probably talk about that. I'm really curious what is their experience. Color and grading, because S-Log3 is obviously a big part of this camera with its 15 stops of dynamic range. And this S-Log3 is improved, right? Because there's something with the FX9. Can you explain that?
Yes, so that's kind of like also, again, we are coming back to workflow and making life easy while delivering the best quality, so flexibility and image quality. FX9's got an S-Log3 is capable of delivering 15 plus, so it's slightly more than 15 stop of dynamic range. So the good news is like our engineers have been fantastic because they matched that dynamic range in S-Log3. So that's the first achievement. And they've been very forward thinking because if you're on a documentary set or like a TV drama set or like even in a cinema set, you might need to like match the colors of your S-Log3 before grading your footage. So you're importing all your footage from your camera A, B, C, D, and then you need to first match the colors, then grade, and then export. And what's important with this is the Alpha 7S Mark III tone and colors have been kind of like tweaked to match the FX9s in S-Log3, which means if you're on a set, your main camera is FX9, you're shooting like, I don't know, your comedians, you have like a hidden camera or a B camera on a different angle, which is Alpha 7S Mark III. You're importing your footage, they look exactly the same. And that's the main purpose, is like the editor will be like, well, I don't need to match my footage, I just need to focus with the, like the colorist about color grading and the editor about like mixing the footage in the right way, and that's it. So you're kind of like losing a step, which is, we believe as a system, from Venice to the Alpha 6000 cameras, makes it very intuitive for people that shoot with multi-camera systems.
Yeah, for a lot of professionals, that will be fantastic news. Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, Pierrick, last stop, because we have to wrap this thing up. Photography. Let's briefly talk about it, because this is obviously a camera targeted on video shooters, but it takes great pictures too. So for which kind of photographers could this be an interesting camera?
So yeah, I'm glad you asked. Like obviously for hybrid shooters, it will be very interesting because not all of them needs more megapixel to print large prints. So for people that are doing like a lot of videography and photography, it will be very appropriate. You still get 12 frames per second, 10 frames per second, sorry. Very amazing low light capabilities in terms of focusing. You've got basically, you've got 1000 uncompressed RAW buffer when you're shooting at 10 frames per second. So it's like with CF Express Type A, so it's virtual unlimited. But also if you're like only using this camera and considering this camera for photography, I think there are many applications like nightscape photography, people shooting like cities at night that need really high ISO, very good quality, crispy details. And also like, I mean, like if you're doing landscape, and you're not printing, and you want like to do, you know, to capture the stars at night and these kind of things, obviously the low light capabilities will be very handy to use on the field. So it's also very, obviously, a very good camera for photographers.
And especially, like you mentioned in the beginning, for people who are shooting video but also want to take pictures a lot, it could be a good combination with this camera. Pierrick, thank you very much.
For having me.
I think, you're welcome. Thank you very much for your time and for all your knowledge. And I hope to see you in the future in person once. Once. Could be nice.
That would be nice to meet you as well.
Bye bye.
Thank you very much, everyone.
En jullie, ontzettend bedankt voor het kijken naar deze preview van de A7S Mark III. Een camera om enthousiast van te worden, zeker als videomaker. Houd dus ons kanaal ook zeker in de gaten, want die review die komt er heel snel aan. Vergeet niet te liken, vergeet niet te abonneren en dan zeg ik tot de volgende.